Okay, so hello everyone. We're going to get started in just a minute, but I'm going to wait for some folks to enter. And as they come through, I'll get us started here. We'll just wait around about a minute here as I see people are coming in. So I think our numbers are getting there. They're just stabilizing now. So as you're coming in, welcome everyone and welcome to our Philosophy Trent Talk, high school edition. We're excited to welcome you to our Trent Talk that's held for Philosophy at Trent, the meaning of life, which is very exciting. It's something I've always wanted, so I'm interested to hear more in our talk today. My name is Ryan. I'm actually an enrollment advisor here at Trent, and I'm located at the Durham GTA campus. I just graduated Trent this year, so again, super excited to be here. And today I am joined by our expert, Dr. Michael Hickson. So the way today is going to work is we're going to do a quick 45-minute lecture with Professor Hickson, and at the end of the talk, we'll have a short question and answer period. So guidance counselors or teachers, if you're watching this or presenting it to a classroom, you can just put into the chat on the right-hand side. And same with any students watching this, if you have any questions on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll be able to answer any questions or ask any questions that we'll be able to answer at the end. So with that, without further ado, I will want to turn it over to our Professor Hickson to get started with our mini lecture.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me. I'm going to start a PowerPoint presentation right now, and hopefully Ryan will be able to share it with you. So that's what I'm doing now. So, right, I am Michael Hickson. I'm a professor at Trent University. I'm also the chair of the Department of Philosophy here at Trent. And a few years ago, I designed a course on the meaning of life. That's offered just about every year, and it gets a lot of students. It tends to be a popular subject. And so today I want to introduce you to that subject by talking to you about this question, what is the meaning of life? And a long time ago, when I was a young philosophy student, I dreamt that someday I would be old and wise, and I would be surrounded by this group of young people, and I would tell them the meaning of life. And I want to tell you that today I'm neither old nor wise. And technically, you're not gathered around me at all, even though you are young people. And most importantly, I have absolutely no intention of telling you the meaning of life today. So I'm going to have to wait for some other day for that dream of mine to come true. And I want to warn you about people who might tell you the meaning of life. I'm not one of them. Some people might want to tell you the meaning of life, and I want to warn you about them because I don't think they know the first and most important thing about the meaning of life if they're going to tell you what it is. And the first and most important thing about the meaning of life is that you have to discover it for yourself. It's not the kind of thing that one person can tell you. So I don't intend to do that today. Well, then what do I intend to do? Well, my presentation has two parts. For about half the presentation, I'm just going to talk to you about the question, what is the meaning of life? Because it's a weird question. It's not like, what is 2 + 2? Or where is the closest grocery store? When you hear questions like that, you know exactly the sort of answer you're supposed to give. But when somebody asks you, what is the meaning of life? It's not entirely clear what they're even asking. What would be a possible answer to that? So I'm going to spend half the presentation talking about that. And then in the second part of the presentation, we will get into some possible answers, or as I've put here, some isms. Philosophy is full of isms like nihilism and theism. And so we'll go through some theories that have tried to tackle the question, what is the meaning of life? And the goal of my presentation here today, well, I have two of them really. The first one is to convince you that there is an important question here. What is the meaning of life is something that you should try to ask yourself and answer. And the second thing is to give you some tools and some ways of thinking about the question that might help you find your own answer. So part one of the presentation will focus just on the question, what is the meaning of life? And to start, I want to tell you about the day that I became a philosopher. I was 12, and when I was 12, now I am going to sound like an old guy here. When I was 12, there was no internet, there was no Wikipedia. And when you wanted to learn something, you had to read a book. And so when I was 12, we had this set of Funk and Wagnall's encyclopedias in my house. And sometimes when I was bored, I would sit in my living room and I'd grab one of these off the shelf and I would randomly open it up and I would read an entry. And one day I took down the volume that had the subjects beginning with P in it, and I opened it up and there was an entry on philosophy. And I don't remember exactly what it said, but it was something like this. it started off by defining philosophy as the discipline that studies the big questions. And these big questions are the ones that have puzzled humankind for thousands of years and that seem unanswerable by the empirical sciences like physics and chemistry and biology. Big questions such as, what is the meaning of life? And so that was the day that I was first introduced to this question, what is the meaning of life? And I remember feeling completely bewildered. It's not that I didn't just know the answer. Of course, I didn't know the answer to the question when I was 12. I didn't even understand the question. So I sat there, and I believe I became a philosopher that day because I spent an hour sitting and asking myself, what does it even mean to ask, what is the meaning of life? I had absolutely no idea, but I came up with three, what I'm going to call false starts. I came up with three possibilities. Today I realized they were all wrong, but they were the first philosophical ideas that I had, and I want to share them with you. So the first thing I thought is, maybe when you ask, what is the meaning of life, you're asking, what is the meaning of the word life? So I thought that was maybe what these philosophers were asking. And I thought they were pretty silly people, because couldn't you just pick up a dictionary and open it to the page with the word life on it and read it? Or maybe the dictionary wasn't the best place to go because it wouldn't be so detailed. So open up a biology textbook or something. So I didn't have a very high opinion of philosophers if one of their big questions was, what is the meaning of the word life?
So Michael, sorry to interrupt.
Yes.
Just before you keep going, I just want to check if you're able to share the PowerPoint on my side. I don't know if you're sharing it right now.
Right. So you haven't seen any of this so far.
I just wanted, yes.
Because I didn't share the screen. Okay.
Now I can see it. Perfect.
Okay.
Perfect.
Well, Okay. So let me go back and just show you the books that I was talking about. No pictures were important, but here were the books. Here was me asking, what does the question even mean? And now here we are on the false starts. So I'll start from the current slide. Is that better? There we go.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, sorry about that. You know, these philosophers with their heads in the clouds, they forget to hit share screen. Okay, so the second false start that I had was maybe the meaning of life was something deeper than asking, what is the meaning of the word life? And maybe it's something kind of religious. It kind of felt religious to me. And so I thought these philosophers are really no different from theologians or priests or something. And while it is true that religions will have something to say about the meaning of life, I do want to convince you that there's something more to the question than just what you're going to find in religious texts. A third philosophical idea I had is, maybe this question, what is the meaning of life, is total nonsense. It kind of sounded like that to me at the age of 12, sitting there in my living room. And so maybe the question is nonsense and philosophy itself is nonsense. I'm a philosopher now, so obviously I'm going to put my cards on the table here. I don't think I was right when I was 12 and I thought philosophy was nonsense. So, well, what's wrong with these three false starts? Why am I calling them false starts? Well, the question, what is the meaning of life, is not about the word life. You could, even at 12, I had a sense that if you wanted to ask what's the meaning of the word, you'd have to put single quotes around the word. And there aren't single quotes around the word. So we're asking something deeper. The people who can tell you what life is are biologists. And so that's a biological question, not a philosophical question. The question, what is the meaning of life, is not just a religious question either. In fact, I would say if you're an atheist, it's more of a question for you than it is for anybody, because religious people are going to get an answer to their question, what is the meaning of life, in a book. They're going to get it, and it's going to be maybe the name of a prophet or something like that. That will, or a symbol like this cross here is supposed to be an answer to the question, what is the meaning of life, for some people, Christians, right? If you're an atheist, you don't have a book. You don't have ready-made answers to deep questions. And so this question, what is the meaning of life, is probably going to be a big one that's going to confront you. Unless, of course, the question, what is the meaning of life, is utter nonsense, in which case you don't have to worry about it. But it's not utter nonsense. And that's the goal of the first part of this presentation. I want to convince you that this question is a meaningful one, an important one, and one that you should be asking yourself. So how am I going to do that? What is the meaning of life all about? Well, one of the philosophical tricks that I learned when I was studying philosophy is sometimes the best way to get to know something and to learn about it is to be confronted with its absence. It's to go somewhere where the thing is not, and then you'll see it. Now that sounds kind of like profound, like I'm trying to sound smart or something, but you know what I'm talking about because you've heard the expression absence makes the heart grow fonder, right? So sometimes if you want to know if you love somebody or how much you love a person, you go away from them. And that's probably going to be the clearest you're ever going to get on what the nature is of your love for a person. And I think the same thing is going to be true with meaning in life. If you want to know what the meaning of life is all about, think about a life that has absolutely no meaning in it. Well, what kind of life is that? What I want to do I want to look at some grumpy cat memes with you for a little while. I hope that you've seen these before, but if you haven't, I've got 4 of them, 4 of the better ones. Here's one. Here's a grumpy cat who's saying, so many reasons to be grumpy, so little time. I don't know what this cat's problem is, but he's pretty grumpy. Like this cat who says, if you're happy and you know it, I don't care. I don't care. Such a mean, grumpy cat, like most cats. And here's another one who says, you look happy. Stop it. Couldn't you just look at these all day? I mean, some people do, right? Like that's my point in a second, by the way. And here's a grumpy cat who says, I had fun once. It was awful. And just, being a grumpy cat all day is probably a meaningless life. So what does this have to do with the meaning of life? Well, to really drive this home, I want you to think about grumpy cats, but I also want to introduce you to an invention of mine. It's in my basement. I've been working on it for years. It's called the Grumpy Cat Machine. And what it is, it's a machine that you can hook yourself up to, and it will nourish you. It will fill your body with calories and hydration. And I've also found these special chemicals that it will inject into you that will always make you feel pleasure. Not too much, because that's actually kind of painful to feel too much pleasure, just the right amount of pleasure. And, it's going to keep you clean and sort of looked after, and it's going to keep you safe. So it's going to look after all of your needs for all of your life, until you die a natural death at 90 or 100 or whatever. But here's the thing. The one condition for having all of your biological needs looked after for all of your life is that you have to look at grumpy cat memes just all day long, just one after another after another. And the question I want you to ask yourself is, would you like to volunteer to be the first person to hook up to my grumpy cat machine? Think about that. Why or why not would you like to do that? Well, let's look at some pros and cons of hooking up to the grumpy cat machine. Well, the first pro, laughter and hilarity. Grumpy cat memes are just great, right? And you get to look at them for your whole life. Free food and drink, right? I've told you, I'm going to intravenously give you nutrition for your entire life. You won't ever have to look after any of those needs. I'm going to give you a constant supply of pleasure chemicals. You're never going to be sad. You're going to be happy all the time. And there's no effort, no worry, no danger. You're going to be looked after in my basement. This kind of sounds creepy. But, I'm going to look after you. Don't worry about it. So these are the pros of being on the Grumpy Cat meme machine. Are there any cons, or is it just obvious? Hook me up right now. Well, there are some cons, I think, and this is getting us back to the very serious point of our presentation. There seems to be something kind of false about this existence, an existence spent entirely on a grumpy cat machine. There also seems to be something kind of unserious about this. I don't quite know what I mean. I'm just sort of, I'm talking around how this thing makes me feel. It feels to me like it would be a waste of a life to hook yourself up to this machine. I mean, even though there are all these pros, it's kind of a waste of an existence. There's also something ugly about it, right? There's something, I mean, can you imagine seeing a person on one of these machines? Like they voluntarily gave up a real life to hook themselves up to a grumpy cat machine. There's something repulsive about that. And bringing it back to the point of this presentation, a life spent in the grumpy cat machine would have no purpose. There's no adventure. There's no meaning, right? That's the point. There's no meaning to this life. So what I'm trying to show you is what it would be like to feel the total absence of meaning in life. The grumpy cat machine is a thought experiment. I don't really have one in my basement. And it would give you a completely meaningless life. So now that you've felt the absence of meaning and you have a really, concrete image of a meaningless life in your mind, we can start to see what meaning in life would involve. It's all the things that you kind of felt deep down were lacking in that grumpy cat life. And what are some of those things? Well, unlike a life of grumpy cat memes, a life with meaning is true life, right? It's well spent. It's full of activities that seem like they were worth your time. It's beautiful, right? What exactly these things mean, they have to be worked out, but we're just coming up with descriptions of what meaning would mean when we're asking what's the meaning of life. There would be purpose, right? So what is this question, what is the meaning of life, asking? Well, it's asking what things give life the following qualities: truth, beauty, value, purpose, success, fulfillment, things like that. Another way of asking the question is, what can you do with your life that would make it better than a life spent looking at grumpy cat memes? Right? Whatever you answer to that question is going to be part of what the meaning of life is to you. Although when I see a grumpy cat meme like this one, if I had $1 for every time I thought of you, I'd be broke. I don't know. Is there really anything that could make your life better than looking at that all day? I'm not sure. Open question. I'm not giving you answers here today. So I'm going to conclude part one. It's really just about the question. So what I want to conclude is that when you ask, what is the meaning of life? What you mean by the question is, what gives life value? We don't often do this, but it's worth thinking about. Can you weigh lives against each other? This life was a better life than that life. If you think there is a meaning of life or a purpose of life, then you can do that. It's not very politically correct to do that, but I mean, we just did that together. We said that a life spent on the grumpy cat machine in my basement is not a very good life. Pretty much any other life, I think, even a life full of pain and suffering and heartbreak, I think would be a better life than a life spent on that machine, because at least it would be a true life, a life that was lived rather than a life that was wasted. What makes a life the best possible life that I can live? That is something that people ask. They say they want to be the best versions of themselves. What I'm trying to show you is that anytime you think like that, you're actually engaging with the question, what is the meaning of life or the purpose of life? So there's that question. What makes life matter, right? You might come to feel this question. I remember when I was a teenager, you're lying in bed and you sort of imagine yourself floating away like an astronaut from the planet and then out of the solar system and then out of the galaxy, and you're floating and you're floating and you're floating, and the Earth is getting tinier and tinier and tinier. And it's this little speck, and then it's invisible. And then the whole solar system is invisible and the whole galaxy is invisible. And suddenly you wonder, wow, does any of it matter? When you have little reflections like that, you're confronting the question, what is the meaning of life? And what's interesting to do is to zoom back in once you start to feel like everything is pointless. Zoom back in and think about some of the stories that have inspired you, or some of the stories that you've heard about, that you've read about in history books, that have scandalized you, that have made you feel despair. And you do feel like it matters. It mattered that World War II happened. Even when you drift away to the farthest reaches of the universe, there's something there that mattered that happened. And you're kind of engaging with that question, what is the meaning of life? It's something. We don't know what it is. It's something. Why am I here is a question that you ask yourself. You start to ask yourself a lot in high school, right? You're confronting the question, what is the meaning of life, when you ask that? Okay, so that's the conclusion of part one. That's the meaning of the question. What is the meaning of life? And now we can start to look at what might be some answers. Okay, so again, I won't endorse any of these, but I'll be your tour guide for some possible answers. Maybe in the end, if somebody wants to write in the chat, what is the meaning of my life? Maybe I would consider telling you, but I wouldn't want to influence you. Okay, so we live we live in a really interesting time where you can get answers to pretty much everything really quickly by just Googling them, right? So can you just Google what is the meaning of life and be done with it? Well, I asked Siri on my phone what the meaning of life is, and I was sort of impressed to find out that Siri has an answer. So Siri responded, all evidence to date suggests it's chocolate, which proves once again that Siri is very funny, but not a very serious Siri. And actually, I did a little research. I think Siri has been programmed with 10 answers to that question so that you get something a little different. Every time it's pretty funny. But I don't think that any serious person has ever thought that chocolate was the meaning of life, even though it is pretty important and very delicious. So we'll look at some serious answers instead of chocolate. And these are going to be answers that have big ism names attached to them. And we'll start with nihilism. So I've chosen this image of sort of the universe and the vast expanse of blackness that has little specks of light in it. And when you look at an image like that, it might make you start to feel a bit like a nihilist. It might also inspire you. In any case, what is nihilism? Well, the term comes from the Latin word nihil, which means nothing. And so nihilism is the view that there's no meaning of life. There's no meaning. Nothing gives value, beauty, purpose, or significance to life. Some people are romantics. They like to talk in terms of value and beauty and purpose and significance, but honestly, they're deluding themselves. There's really nothing here. I've used the image of a rock here because a nihilist would think that a human life and a rock are pretty much the same thing. I mean, you're a pile of particles, and for some reason you came together, and at some point you're going to fall apart. That's all there is to it. And so going back to our grumpy cat memes, a nihilist would say a life of grumpy cat memes is just as good, just as meaningful, or rather just as meaningless as any other life. All lives are equally meaningless. So there's a view for you. You always have to start with, the extreme views and then move to the more, the more plausible ones. But there are some pros. We have to, as philosophers, we weigh pros and cons. What are the pros of this view? It's a simple theory. Anybody can understand it. I mean, it's not complicated. What is the meaning of life? There isn't one. Couldn't get simpler than that, right? And there's this idea called Occam's razor that says other things being equal, the simplest explanation is the best one. So could you get any simpler than the explanation that there's no meaning of life? It seems pretty simple. It also, so getting kind of serious again, it accounts for some of our more depressive and pessimistic moments in our lives. I mean, sometimes, you really can feel like there's nothing out there. There's no purpose. There is no meaning of life. And nihilism gives you an explanation. You feel that because you're right. There is no purpose or meaning to life. So it gives an explanation. There can be other explanations, important ones for depression and pessimism. I wouldn't blame if you're feeling depressed. I wouldn't think, oh, that must mean that I'm a nihilist. It can explain as well why humans are still in disagreement about the meaning of life. Philosophers have been debating this for thousands and thousands of years. Why? Well, because they're debating nothing. It's a word game that they've gotten themselves into. There is no truth about the meaning of life to be discovered. It's just people making a career off of absolutely nothing. That's why we've been debating this. Those are some potential pros of this theory. There are cons, though. It's a bit simple. Really. I mean, you're giving up when you say, sure, philosophers, some of the smartest people for thousands of years have been debating this, but they're all wrong. There is no meaning of life. That's a bit simple. Maybe once you've read everything that they've written, and maybe once you've thought for decades and decades about the subject, then we might believe you if you say there's no meaning of life. But until then, it kind of sounds like you're giving up, not like you're thinking too hard. It also implies that there's really nothing significant of large-scale loss of human life in tragedies like the Holocaust. I mean, if you're a nihilist, then there's not a whole lot to get worked up about. And feels wrong to say that. It feels like, large scale tragedies do matter. There is something wrong with that. There is a meaning or a purpose, and something went wrong because the meaning and purpose wasn't achieved in those situations. There's, nihilism seems to be opposed to the idea that there's any good or evil, but there seems to be good and evil. So nihilism can't be right. And to go back to the grumpy cats, I mean, if you're a nihilist, there's really no difference, no significant difference between a life spent on the grumpy cat machine and Albert Einstein's life. But that just seems wrong. That doesn't seem like anybody can take that very seriously. So there's nihilism, pros and cons. Another ism, theism. Here's a nice image where sort of God is swooping in and is going to create the first human Adam, right? This is in the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. And I'm going to talk about one. There are lots of theisms. So theism in general is belief in God. There are lots of theisms out there. I'm going to talk about Abrahamic theism, which is the theism that's shared by the religions of the book, the religions that share the story of Abraham. And that's Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. And they propose roughly the same account of the meaning of life. I mean, there are significant differences between these religions, obviously, but they do all agree that human beings were created directly by God, that human beings were created good and in the image of God, that the meaning of life is to be like God as much as possible. And the purpose of life is to, win eternal life with God, right? So you have something to work on, and it's all connected to God. What are some pros of that? Well, believed by many people. So, if we're going to decide this thing democratically, I guess theism would probably win. As a matter of fact, it does give meaning to many lives. So a lot of people who believe in the Abrahamic religions and who go through dark periods in their life will report feeling as though those dark times in their life were still meaningful. They had hope, they had purpose. They weren't alone because God was with them. So psychologically, it's an advantageous belief. It causes humans to aspire to greatness, right? I mean, I'm supposed to be like God. That's a good project. That'll take you a while to achieve. And it gives hope in dark times. That's useful. And there's psychological evidence that that's the case. Some cons, not believed by many people as well. I mean, a pro and a con can be similar. There are atheists who have thought very hard about what evidence there is for the existence of God and for the truth of religious scriptures. And they've come to the conclusion after a lot of searching, sincere searching, that, this is a story. That's all it is. They don't find scientific evidence of its truth. On a different level, theism makes meaning into something invisible, right? I mean, another thing that the Abrahamic religions have in common is that God is mostly hidden. That's in fact a theological doctrine, the hiddenness of God that these religions share. And possibly God is also unattainable by humans. And so an answer to the question, what is the meaning of life, that says, well, here it is, and here's a book that's all about it, that's advantageous because it's concrete, you can read about it. But if at the end of the day it's ultimately unattainable, it's not clear how advantageous that really is. In some cases, this meaning of life, that it's God and it's attaining eternal life, it can lead to devaluing this life. This life is maybe 80, 90 years if you're really lucky. The next life is eternity. So, you kind of have to think, why am I wasting my time in this life? Why don't I just get to the next one as quickly as I can? Because that's where all the fun is, right? And so if you believe that the real party is in the next life, then you're not going to have as much fun in this one. There's also the problem of evil, right? So the Abrahamic religions believe in a perfectly good God who created humans and the entire world good. It's not entirely clear how so much evil creeped in, right? They have stories about it. There was the Garden of Eden and a serpent, and there was temptation, and there was human pride. But it seems like a perfectly good, all-powerful, all-knowing God could have come up with a different plan. a different design. At least that's what philosophers have put together in the form of an argument called the problem of evil that tends to the conclusion that there isn't this good God responsible for the universe. So that's a problem. It's not to say it's a refutation. Theologians have answers to that, but it is a problem. Okay, one ism that doesn't have that problem, or most philosophers would say it doesn't have the problem as much as theism does, is naturalism. So here's a little image where you have human beings kind of evolving. That's not really how to think about evolution, but in any case, you've got animals just thinking about eating, surviving, and reproducing, and then you have humans asking what it's all about. So what is naturalism? Well, it's an ism that has a lot of different meanings. It's kind of tough to pin it down, but all the meanings have at least this much in common, that naturalism is the view that there are no supernatural entities. There's no God, there are no angels or anything like that. Everything that exists is caused by nature and follows scientific laws. So in general, that's a safe definition of all of naturalism. So on this view, human beings are animals, basically. We evolve like any other animal in accordance with the principles of natural selection. So what's the meaning of life on this view? Well, it's to survive and it's to reproduce. That's what you're supposed to do here. What makes one life better than another? Well, the ability to survive and reproduce. And what does that mean concretely? Well, health, fitness, strength. Those are the kinds of things that you want to shoot for in this life because they'll maximize your chances of being a good animal and living long and having lots of offspring. You can also think, along naturalistic lines about the question, what is the meaning of life? Why are we, if we're just animals, how can we be asking that question? Doesn't it prove that we aren't just animals, that we sit around asking this question? Well, maybe, but also maybe not. Maybe asking the question and being philosophical is just another way to survive and reproduce. It might be that by seeking a meaning of life, we are engaging in something that is advantageous from the point of view of evolution. Maybe by finding a sense of purpose, even one that's completely false, right? So maybe there is no God, but maybe as a matter of scientific fact, people who believe in God live longer. They find more reasons to hope and to keep fighting and to keep living. Maybe, right? It's, in any case, I'm just pointing to the idea that naturalism gives you a way of thinking naturalistically about questions like this. What are some pros? Well, it's science-based, it's evidence-based. It's specific, it's concrete, and it's down to earth, right? So what's the meaning of life? Survival. Just keep living one day to the next. Reproducing, so it's concrete and it's fun. It's not speciesist. So all animals, even plants, have the same meaning of life, right? So this is an advantage if you're thinking in terms of the health of our environment. We don't have this view that human beings are above everything else. We're in there with the rest of the environment, and we should be caring about the environment because we're just part of it, right? Some cons. It seems a bit counterintuitive. It's when you put your science hat on, it feels right, but then think about it. Human life is just about survival. There seems to be something a little bit deflating about that. It seems like when you fall in love for the first time, it seems like that there's something more important about that than surviving, or when you read a book that really just blows your mind. Survival, that's what you're doing. You are just surviving. That doesn't seem right. So it kind of feels reductive. It's like all human aspirations are reduced to the quest to reproduce. But, I defy anybody to watch footage of Apollo 11 and astronauts, landing on the moon and walking around and going somewhere else in the solar system and tell me that all of that is about survival and reproduction. I know you can tell a story that says that, but it seems like there's something more going on with human beings. It also, sure, it's fine that it's not speciesist and all animals are one and the same and so on, but it does seem like there's a difference that's attached to the question of the search for meaning. There's a difference between human beings and lower life forms. At the very least, tell me there's something different about human beings and like an earthworm. I mean, it seems like you gotta say there's something really significantly different. We're not just all trying to survive and reproduce, but maybe I'm just speciesist. Okay, another ism, existentialism, and if you want to be kind of a cool philosopher, then you want to be an existentialist, and you need to get kind of a trench coat, and you have to smoke cigarettes all the time and have big, thick glasses and so on. And you absolutely have to learn French. So that's existentialism. And existentialism is the view that there is no single purpose of every human life. Each and every human is free to create their own meaning. And what gives value to human life is authenticity. That's a big, important word for existentialists. And what does that mean? To be authentic is to live according to the meaning and purpose that you've chosen for yourself. So the important thing is, you pick your meaning, and then to live a valuable life is to then live according to the meaning that you've chosen. So existentialists don't believe that human life can be reduced scientifically. There is more to human beings than science can ever explain. We make our own laws. So yes, we do follow natural laws. Yes, we are animals and we are organisms and we're physical beings subject to gravity and so on and so forth. But we also make our own laws. We are free. And freedom is a kind of law that human beings bring into the universe and that we live according to it. And we have the freedom to cause our own meaning and our own authenticity. So what are some pros of that view? Well, it gives you the freedom to be different, to live life how you choose, right? So some people feel kind of constrained in a religious worldview. In a religious worldview, everybody's kind of the same, right? Everybody's engaged in the same project. Yeah, there are lots of ways to achieve the goal of the project, but everybody is supposed to end up in heaven with God. Also, if you're a naturalist, we're all just kind of, in this natural world fighting for scarce resources and trying to live. I mean, you're all just engaged in the same thing. Existentialists allow you to choose to be something different, like an artist. The meaning of my life is creating great art. It's making great music, or it's painting great paintings, or it's philosophizing, or it's writing, or it's sports. I'm an athlete, and that's the meaning of my life. If you're an existentialist, you have the freedom to do that sort of thing. And so it explains what's different about, well, humans and also humans and other life forms. And it encourages and values creativity and originality, not conformity and obedience. And I think a lot of people like that. Some cons, well, try it. Creating a meaning of your life, it's hard. It's a burden. It can feel like it's too much. It's hard enough to follow a meaning that somebody else has given you, but to have to be the maker of the meaning and then live up to it every day, some people will report feeling like that's a bit too much for a human being. It's also not really evidence-based or scientific. Some people would sort of respond and say, well, what is your evidence that freedom exists? It does seem like the more we learn about human minds, the more we're sort of determined by psychological laws that we aren't always aware of. So it's a nice idea that we're free to make our own meaning, but really you're just a product of your environment and you think you're free, but you're not, as people might say. And it's also a nice idea that you can be whatever you want to be. And, the meaning of your life is yours to construct. Well, it seems odd then that so many people end up having roughly the same meaning and purpose in life, which is, to get a job, to look after the necessities of life, maybe to, have a family and provide for them. And it seems like if existentialism were true, we'd have a lot more variety, but people kind of end up being roughly the same. So it seems to be a bit of a dream more than a theory with evidence. Okay. So another one, we're getting close to the end, by the way, moral rationalism. Here's a philosopher named Immanuel Kant. And, he's somebody who held this view here. So moral rationalism is the view that there are objective moral laws that govern all human behavior. So by means of reason, careful thinking, you can perceive moral laws that give you purpose, direction, and value to your life. So the meaning of life is to obey rational moral laws. It's to be good. And where good is defined not by religion and not by your own individuality, but by human reason. There is one good, capital G good, for all of us. And you can discover it by thinking clearly. I mean, some moral laws, like, you shouldn't steal from the grocery store. Everybody kind of feels that deep down, that you shouldn't do that, or you shouldn't take your car and smash into other people's cars in the parking lot and then drive away. I mean, everybody just kind of knows that that would be a wrong thing to do. That's evidence that there's this moral law that we're all kind of tapping into. Our human reason is like a satellite that's picking up these laws from the universe. Some pros of the view, it accounts for the similarities between humans and cultures. Sure, there are differences between individual humans and cultures, humans and cultures over time, but there are also similarities. I mean, you can read the ethical writings of people from thousands of years ago, and they'll speak to you. They'll say things that you will believe and that you will agree with. And even from different cultures. We in the philosophy program at Trent, we will read Eastern and Western accounts of the moral life. And yes, there are differences, but deep down, there are more similarities and things that continue to speak to us after centuries and even millennia. Moral rationalism would explain this because ethical writers over time have just been writing about the same objective facts. So moral rationalism also gives a common purpose to all of humanity. So, existentialism kind of makes us all different, but moral rationalism puts us all on the same team. We're all trying to be good in the same way. So we avoid conflict and competition with one another. And, another advantage is it makes the meaning of life and morality go hand in hand. It's not clear existentialism does that. It seems like if you're an existentialist, you can live a very meaningful life and also be a bad person. So maybe you decide that deep down, you are a great artist. And so you leave your family and your children when they're very young and vulnerable, you leave them and you go off and you become a great painter. And you become a great painter. And so you achieve meaning in your life, but hold on, what about the fact that you had this family that kind of needed you and you just abandoned them? That doesn't seem like a very good thing to do. But maybe if you're an existentialist, you think, well, sometimes the meaning of life is like that. You have to be a bad person to achieve meaning. There's something that doesn't feel right about that. So what's nice about moral rationalism is that meaning and morality will go hand in hand. Some cons, it's nice to say there's one moral law for all people, but boy, do we get into a lot of fights when we try to spell out exactly what that moral law is. It's who gets to decide, who has the authority to determine in cases where there's disagreement, what is the moral law. And also, being morally good all the time, it seems kind of boring, right? It seems like, isn't there more to life than just being good? Like, can't we have some fun sometimes? I mean, existentialism seems like maybe it's too much fun. Moral rationalism seems like maybe it's not enough fun. And there does seem to be a difference between meaning and morality. I mean, you might want one to have a relation to the other, but it seems that collapsing them might collapse two things that are very different. And finally, I think if I'm not mistaken, I have a minute, Ryan.
Yeah, but it's okay. I'm so in.
Last ism.
You can go.
I don't want to. So if I had to recommend one book to you all, I would recommend this book called All Things Shining, which I read and enjoyed enormously. And it's a very creative book written just sort of in the last decade on finding meaning in life in this age that we live in now. And the authors, Dreyfus and Kelly, they recommend a kind of modern polytheism. So polytheism is the belief in many gods, sort of like the ancient Greeks and Romans had. And you might think that we're scientific, so we're well beyond that, right? But they actually say, hang on, there was something very profound about polytheism. So what was profound about it? Well, they said, we should continue to believe in a God of music and a God of love and a God of sport and a God of war. Because we actually do experience life like that there are these moments in our lives when these forces will whoosh into our life and inject our lives with sudden moments of meaningfulness. So, think about being at a concert and the whole crowd really just getting taken up by the music. There's something kind of religious about that, about uniting with an entire crowd around a piece of music. And the way that maybe ancient people would have thought of that is that there was a god of music that kind of came in and inspired everybody simultaneously. Or being at a sporting event and a team, a football team throwing a Hail Mary pass in the last second and it's caught, with one hand by somebody who dives in the end zone and they catch it. There's something almost religious about that. And there's something that suddenly everything feels right in the world when you see something like that. And Dreyfus and Kelly want us to take those moments very seriously. What they want to propose is that that's what gives life meaning, are those moments where something whooshes into your life. And it can't really be explained very rationally or scientifically, but that's the point. It's like polytheism. It's not supposed to be rational or scientific. What it is, it's a gift. Meaning in life is not something that you try to achieve or you study scientifically or you dissect. It's something that you receive as a gift that you didn't expect. There it is. And the right attitude toward it is not rationalization, but just gratitude. I'm happy that right now all is right in the world. And to be open to these moments, to put yourself in situations like sporting events and concerts where these moments happen. What are some pros of that? Well, there are many meanings, right? There's not just one. There's the meaning that comes through music and through art and through sport and through study and through family relations and through love and so on. And it's not a choice. Like, you don't have that burden that the existentialists have. It's a gift. It's just given to you. It's free. And it can also be something that's common to many people in a moment, like a crowd at a sporting event, but it can also be something unique. There are individuals who have this inspiration on a regular basis, people like Beethoven. So the meaning in their life is individual. Some cons, there's no rationale to it. So it's surprising and it's arbitrary. Did you get any meaning today? Nah. How about you? Nah. Hopefully tomorrow we get some meaning. There's something a little bit depressing about that. You might prefer some of the other accounts that ensure that if you work hard enough, you can get meaning. There's no way to achieve it. You have to wait for it. It's not permanent. It's just always coming and going. Okay. So those are the isms. Conclusion, finally. So I've given you a bunch of isms. I didn't endorse any of them. But I'm not going to apologize for that, because philosophy isn't about giving answers. It never has been. The first Western philosopher, Socrates, that you might learn about in university, he would just go around asking people questions. He would find people who thought they had the answer to everything. And then he would go and he would make them realize they had never even spent any time thinking about the question. So they didn't have the answers. And he got them thinking about their answers and showing them that there were holes in their answers. Philosophy is about getting people to think for themselves about questions. And so what I'm trying to do here is, by asking you, what is the meaning of life? I hope that I've been able to convince you that there is a question there. It's an important one. It's a meaningful one. And I hope I've maybe given you a little bit of guidance to find an answer to the question. And I do want to give you a little bit of advice. If you have long periods of feeling like life is pointless, I want you to reach out for help, because there's a fine line between being philosophical and being depressed. So philosophy, if you're being philosophical, you'll be filled with wonder and you'll be, thinking about isms and questions and things like that. If what you're feeling is something more like depression, then there's not going to be that sense of wonder and fun about it. And I would be concerned about you if you were having long periods of time. Another bit of advice, whether you're being philosophical or depressed, you shouldn't do either alone. Philosophy is not, it's not a one-person thing. It's a team sport, and depression requires help. So whatever the case may be, talk to people. These are deep things we're talking about. High school is a time when you have, lots of deep thoughts, and you want to make sure you're surrounding yourself with good people. And if you do sort of feel like a nihilist, maybe you need to reach out for some help. And so here's a number, and here's a website where you can get help if you're feeling too nihilistic too often. So with that little bit of advice, I'll end the presentation. So Ryan.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Michael. That was amazing. And it was funny. Every ism you gave, I thought, this is the one. This is the one I'm gonna. And then you give the pros and cons, and it really got me thinking, and it got me every time. So with that, again, if anything Michael talked about today, if you have any questions or anything like that, you can just put them in the chat, and I'll be able to read them out loud. While you're thinking of questions, or maybe you're typing them away, I just want to mention that Michael is one of our professors at Trent, and if you are thinking Trent, or maybe you're a student who's watching this in a classroom, you can always join us for an on-campus tour. We offer those Monday through Saturday, and you can book them on our site too. Also, just by attending this presentation today, we're actually doing free tuition for students who interact with our Trent in any way. So if you are a teacher or professor displaying this in front of a classroom, if you want to send an email to the Trent Talks at trentu.ca, I'll be able to enter those students into that as well. And we're giving away a free Trent hoodie every day this fall too. So again, if I'm able to send that list or get that list, then I'll make sure their names are in there. And if you do have any questions about anything you heard today at all, please reach out to our Discover Trent at trentu.ca or our Discover Trent Durham at trentu.ca if your more questions are related to the Durham campus. I'm not seeing too many questions as of right now. Just give it another minute here. Yeah, and thank you for all for joining us. And there was a point in the talk when you were talking about the grumpy cat memes, and I was thinking, could I do this all day? Could I look in there? It made me laugh every time. I don't know how many grumpy cat memes is too many grumpy cat memes, to be honest. I don't think it would ever be enough.
Well, as long as they keep coming up with new ones, I mean, I'd have to honestly think about it. Because I'm looking after all your nutrition, and I'm pumping you full of pleasure. Okay, what kind of philosophy do I specialize in is a question that just came in the chat. Should I write an answer, or is it okay if I just speak it?
You can speak it.
Yeah, so the kind of philosophy that I do research on, that I've written about in the form of articles and books, is the history of philosophy. So I do the history of philosophy from the 17th century to the 18th century. So you may have heard of philosophers like René Descartes, or David Hume, or John Locke, or Immanuel Kant, like we saw. And this is a time when philosophy was becoming more scientific. So it's the time of the scientific revolution. So Copernicus and Galileo are part of it. So I study that period in the history of philosophy where religion started to play less of a role, science started to play more of a role, and people were really asking questions about what is the meaning of life, you know. So that's what I've done. I see another question. Should we focus more on what gives the essence of life, or what we can do in our lives to give meaning? Let me see if I understand the question. So how I understand the question is, well, let me say this. I think that what you're asking is a great question about whether we should be thinking about the meaning of life with our minds and trying to solve the problem by kind of puzzling about it and coming up with a theory, or should we do things that we find meaningful? And I love that question, because that is a great piece of advice that I would like to give you. I don't know that I'm ever going to find the meaning of life in the form of an answer to a question, but I have very often in my life, even this week, had meaningful moments. And I've learned over time how to create those meaningful moments. So I said earlier that I think I do have the meaning of my life. And there are a couple of them, but one of the surprising ones is chess. So about 5 or 6 years ago, I became very, very obsessed with the game of chess, and I read books about it, and I study it, and I play it constantly. And I found that by learning more about this game and getting deeper into it, I really find my life takes on another level. I can't explain it, but I know that if I play chess and I immerse myself in it, I get meaning in my life. Also, obviously, if I spend time, I have kids, if I spend time with my kids and I have meaningful moments where I talk to them about things, So I can't answer the question, what is the meaning of life? But I can go home right now and I can create meaningful moments. And I would urge all of you to focus more on that. And then maybe when we're all old and gray and on the top of the mountain, we can share notes on what exactly is the meaning of life. What are your thoughts on finding the meaning versus finding the spark of your life? I like that question as well. I'm not entirely sure what the difference is, but I think I know, again, by having experiences what you're talking about, right? So when I think about the meaning of life, I think of something grand, like becoming a religious saint or something like that, and it's something kind of permanent. And when I think about the spark, I think about things like chess, like things that when I do them, they just really light me up, right? And I have a feeling that they're connected. I have a feeling that the things that will give you spark in your life are going to be things that will be part of a meaningful life, right? So I would use sparks as a guide, really. So I don't know what the meaning of life is, but I know it has something to do with chess. And what might that be? Well, I think what it might have to do with is when I'm playing chess, I'm using every ounce of mental energy I have, all of my concentration, right? All of my memory and imagination. And so I think that probably the lesson there for me is that whatever the meaning of life is, it's going to be something that involves the use of every part of you. That's what's pathetic about the grumpy cat meme machine, is that you're not using any part of you. You're not doing anything, right? So yeah, I think Tanya, if that's your name, I agree. They're not mutually exclusive. And, and I think the spark is probably a guide to meaning. So, and I think at the stage that you're all at in your lives, that's probably the best use of your time, is finding out what gives you a spark, right? And just trying to live as many moments as you can in that sparky state, right? Because, I meant to say this during the presentation, the grumpy cat meme machine is a thought experiment. Obviously, it's a little bit of sci-fi, but, it's also sadly the reality for some people. I mean, how many times have you seen people just doing this, like just staring at their phone? What are they doing? They're just scrolling through memes. They're looking through Instagram and then Facebook and then Twitter. And by the time they get done that cycle, they're ready to go back and start over because it's probably all refreshed. And, how many hours of the day are people spending doing really nothing very meaningful? And that kind of thing can become very addictive. So you really do have to stop once in a while and say, is this really what I want to be doing? Do I really want to plug myself into the meme machine right now? Or should I, go for a walk? Should I pet my dog? Because that's something a little bit more meaningful. So watch out for the grumpy cat meme machine, because it's more real life than maybe some of us want to admit. Thanks. So those are great questions, by the way.
I don't see any other questions. Like you mentioned, those were really, I see one.
Oh. Well, let me just say, I like memes. I got to be honest with you. I mean, I spend some time every day looking at really dumb stuff on the internet because I think it has some place in a meaningful life. I mean, there is some very funny stuff on the internet, and I am not above looking at it, right? And so, no, I'm not saying it's the opposite of a meaningful life, but I do think that a life spent doing nothing but indulging in memes is probably the opposite of a meaningful life, right? So, yeah, I'm not somebody who's stuck up and if it's not a book written by a Nobel Prize winner, I don't want it. I mean, I work through the goofy stuff on Netflix as much as anybody does and get totally fixated on just laughing. And I think you have to, especially during a pandemic. You need memes and silly humor during a pandemic and after.
That's good to know. I
What
thought
about you? Do you think memes are the opposite? Do we have to go anywhere? I'm curious if anybody there is willing. Do any of you know the meaning of life? Oh, I saw somebody raise a hand. Can we actually get a voice here?
Here, Susan, I think I can, if you want to talk. If you don't want to, you can just type in the chat, but let's see if this works.
Can we unmute Susan so she can speak? Oh, here she is.
Hi, no, I do not have the meaning of life, but we had a question from class. Can the isms be used together? Like, is there something that, will allow us to find meaning by looking at all those isms that you've talked about?
That's a great question. Yeah, so I'm going to answer that with another ism. So one of the isms that comes up in the history of philosophy is eclecticism. And it's the ism that says that your philosophy should be eclectic. It should have a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And there are some famous philosophers who were eclectics, like one of my favorite philosophers, Michel de Montaigne, who wrote the essays and invented the word essay, by the way. So what you do there is you find, you find what you like in each of the isms, and then you try to come up with your own ism, or not even an ism. You just sort of take what you like about them. Sometimes it'll work, and sometimes it's tough to work. I mean, how can you take, for example, theism and naturalism, entirely together? It seems like theism is the belief in a supernatural entity, God, and naturalism is the belief that there are no supernatural entities, so there is no God. So the two don't really go together, but you might do something like, which a lot of religious people do. You can believe in God and think that evolution and natural selection are tools that God used to create the universe, for example. So yeah, I think you can do that. The way I personally take isms is I take them as inspiration. I take them as ideas. I would never go all in for any ism. I don't think philosophy is supposed to be a team sport or a political battle or something. I think you should just make this all your own. I hope that answers your question. It's a great question. Any other questions, or Ryan, are we waiting on anything else? No?
Yeah, no, if there's any other questions, you feel free to put them in the chat, or else definitely end our mini lecture today. Same thing, if anyone else wants to share or wants to speak, yeah, you can totally ask on mute too. We have the power to do so. But yeah, not seeing anything else as of right now. And thank you for all the great questions and for everyone coming today. And thank you for speaking today, Professor Hickson. It was honestly an honor to listen. And again, if you want to go back and
see social justice right there.
Oh, sorry.
I don't think I hit that.
I thought I heard social justice. Is somebody looking at the poster behind me?
Maybe. Not too sure.
A lot of activity in that class, but we'd love to know what's going on. If anybody's wondering about the posters behind me at the Trent Philosophy Department, we have an annual lecture series called the Ryle Lecture Series, and we're very fortunate to be able to bring in basically anybody we want. We've brought in a lot of the most famous philosophers working in the world right now, and they speak for about 3 evenings in a row once a year. And all the posters behind me are posters from the past. We've had about 50 of these things, and so we always make a poster out of the lecture series. So I don't know if there was a question about that, but I do see Susan has her hand up again.
Yes, it was our class that looked at the social justice poster. We are a social justice class, and we have found this very interesting. And just to make those connections of morality and social justice.
Right, so that was the title of the Ryle lecture series of Bernard Williams. In what year was that? The 1985 Ryle lecture series. So that's what that's from. I like social justice, though. It's not just a poster to me, but and I think that's a great link to make between the meaning of life and social justice. I mean, these things should be connected, right? We should be trying to make sure that the ability of every person in the world to achieve meaning in their life should be the same, right? So we shouldn't be thinking about social justice in terms of getting kind of the necessities of life to people, but we should be thinking about social justice in terms of raising the capacity of every person around us to have a meaningful life. And that's going to involve, I think, a lot more than food and drink and shelter and clothing, which is maybe what some people think in terms of, but we should be thinking in terms of education and career opportunities and things like that. So I do think there's a connection between social justice and the meaning of life.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great question and points again. This is great.
Yeah, I think that might wrap it up. And again, thank you to everyone for sharing. And again, great questions and such a nice audience. So again, we're posting this talk too on our Trent Talks webpage. So if you thought it was really informative or you want to share it with someone else, you will totally be able to do so as well. Awesome. Well, thank you again. And yeah, I'm going to end the webinar now.
Okay, thanks.